We are online, we're recording, we're going to get started. Ms. Pacina, can you please start us off with the roll call?
Good morning, Commission. District 1, present. District 2, District 3, vacant. District 4,
Present.
District 5,
Present.
District 6,
Present.
District 7, District 7, District 8,
Present.
District 9,
District 9 is present.
District 10,
Present.
District 11, District 11, District 12,
Present.
District 13,
Present.
District 14, and Place 15. You have quorum, sir.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pacina. Good morning, Commissioners. Today is Thursday, February 16th. It is 9:10 a.m. We are on the record. Great to see you all. Seems like we had a long break. Commissioners, we're going to move the briefings, the ethics briefing and the briefing on the Forward Dallas to the end of the briefing session. I'd like to go ahead and try to get all the briefings on the zoning cases first. In case we run long, I'd like not to have the briefing on those right before we hear them, as we do have the apportionment later on this afternoon. Quick preview, cases 3, 4, 8, and 9 on the consent agenda have come off. So as of this moment, the consent agenda consists of cases 5, 6, and 7. Case number 3 has come off consent and will be held to March 23rd, and we will brief it then. So we'll move to case number 4. Commissioner Hampton is running a little bit late. Mr. Pape, if you don't mind, we can maybe circle back to that one so she can be here when we brief that case. That takes us to case number 5. Mr. Mulkey. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Commissioners.
we're on a holding pattern here for technology. Commissioners, just like to recognize Commissioner Hampton is online. Good morning.
Okay, good morning. We're still waking up. The computer's still waking up. We're going to make it. All right, first case today is Z212-330. The request is for the renewal of specific use permit number 2398 for the sale of alcoholic beverages in conjunction with a general merchandise or food store greater than 3,500 square feet on property zoned to CR Community Retail District with a D1 liquor control overlay. It's located at the northwest corner of Lake June Road and North Masters Drive, and it's about 7.17 acres. Location map showing the property within city limits. Aerial map with the area of request outlined in blue. Zoning map with surrounding zoning districts and land uses. To the north, zoned R75 is single family. To the east, southeast, to the south are various retail and personal service uses, generally under CR district as well as PD 805. Also to the south, zoned R75 is single family, and then to the west is a mix of more retail and personal service uses as well as undeveloped properties owned in MF2A district. So the site is currently zoned to CR district with a D1 overlay. It's developed with a mix of general merchandise, retail, and personal service uses. The applicant proposes to continue the sale of alcoholic beverages in conjunction with the existing general merchandise use. To do this, they are requesting an additional 5-year period, plus eligibility for automatic renewal for additional 5-year periods. Other than that, they do not propose any changes to the conditions of the existing SUP or to the existing site plan. On December 9th, 2020, City Council approved this SUP initially for a 2-year period, which expired on December 9th of last year. However, the applicant did file for renewal on August 31st of last year, therefore they're covered there. So this is on Lake June Road, looking north from the street frontage of the property. You can see that Fiesta store in the background. And some closer views on the site. This is looking north. And then just kind of moving in a clockwise direction, you can see some of those other retail uses within the shopping center and parking. This is the existing site plan for the SUP. As I said, there are no changes proposed here. And with that, staff's recommendation is approval of the applicant's request for a 5-year period with eligibility for automatic renewal for additional 5-year periods subject to those revised conditions. And I'm available for any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions, commissioners? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mulkey.
Thank you.
Commissioners, before we go to the next case, just like the record reflect that Commissioner Treadway joined us this morning at 9:19 a.m. Good morning. And also, Vice Chair Rubin is going to be remote in and out today, so I have asked Commissioner Anderson to serve as Vice Chair for the day. Can I get a motion? Thank you very much. I have a motion by Commissioner Young, seconded by Commissioner Carpenter. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. Let's go back to case number 3, now that we have Commissioner Hampton online. Pardon me, Commissioner, case 4. Good morning, Mr. Pepe.
Good morning. See if I can get this going for us. Can you hear me all right? Okay. This item 4 is Z212322. It's an application for a specific use permit for a tower antenna for cellular communication on property zoned sub-district 3 within Plan Development District 317, Cedars Area Special Purpose District. The purpose of this request is to allow for a new tower antenna for cellular communication, which requires an SUP in this zoning district. The area of request is 2,400 square feet. It's located just outside of downtown Dallas.
Mike, Mr. Pepe, could you speak up a little bit, please?
Certainly. This is the subject site, and this is the area of request in relation to surrounding zoning. And so to the north is Interstate 30 right-of-way, to the northwest and west is more Interstate 30 right-of-way. There's an undeveloped site to the south. There's an office to the southeast. There's a community service center to the east. And so it is located in the I-30 right-of-way currently, and that still has that sub-district 3 plan development 317 zoning. And within the PD, the general regulations that apply to tower antenna use still apply in this circumstance. And it does require an SUP specifically per the PD sub-area. Proposed height would be similar in siding and size as TxDOT high mast lighting along the corridor, as well as similar size to the tower antenna currently located across I-30 from this. And the code generally stipulates cellular towers can be exempt from residential proximity slope height regulations if an SUP is required for the cellular use and the impact of the tower on adjacent districts is considered in the SUP process. So, however, the site is generally located far from residential properties, which would project any proximity slopes. Applicant requests an SUP for a tower antenna for a 10-year period with eligibility for automatic renewals for additional 10-year periods. So when we get into the site, this is across Cadiz. Looking at the site, there are signs on the site which is basically where the area of request is, since it is 2,400 square feet of a larger piece of right-of-way. And there's a slope behind the area of request that slopes down into the canyon, I-30 right now. And then this is kind of on the site looking northwest towards downtown, towards the canyon. And this is looking north up Cadiz towards the Dart Rail is about 100 feet up street from the area of request. Then there's a community service center to the east across the Dart right away. There's an office across Cadiz to the southeast. A little more office complex there. And there's an undeveloped parcel, sort of catty corner. Actually, it's just across Cadiz still. And here's the site plan as they proposed it. So essentially a small turn in off of Cadiz with the tower antenna kind of on the highest elevation on this site as it does slope down. You can kind of see that on the site plan. And part of this is related to the reconstruction of I-30. They do note that the ramp on the southern part of this site plan has to be closed, and that's part of the ongoing 30 project, which is a little bit bigger in scale than this, but this is the site plan as it exists. And a little more detail on that. They have 3 cabinet boxes and a monopole in the middle of the kind of enclosed area. And so the proposed conditions are standard for wireless towers. They have a height limit of 125 measured to the top of the structure. They have a co-location for other wireless carriers to be allowed to install wireless equipment on there, and then the 10-year periods. Staff recommendation is approval for a 10-year period with eligibility for automatic renewals for an additional 10-year period subject to a site plan, elevation, and conditions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pepe. Questions, commissioners? Commissioner Hampton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Pepe, I think you mentioned this is a relocation of the existing tower. Do you know if there were any sites that were evaluated on what I'll call the north side of I-30 where the existing tower is located?
I don't know if there were any sites on the north side, on the downtown side of I-30 along the way. I know that there were other sites considered, and I can go into more detail about that if necessary, but none of them that I know of were necessarily north of I-30, but the applicant can speak to it if they need to.
Okay. And I guess generally, the existing location is a tower. You mentioned that a lot of the TxDOT equipment is also, whether it's the high mast lighting or other utility and infrastructure supporting the highway. Is there anything that is comparable to this on or near the proposed site on the Cedar side of I-30?
There is one. The reason I drew attention to the high mast lighting is there is a high mast lighting probably within 200 feet from this site. So it's on the next parcel to the northeast. So you can see that here. Of course, that's subject to change, and it might shift. Actually, you can see the existing tower across I-30 in this image, and it is similar within about 10 feet. And then the high mast lighting, my understanding, is over 100 feet, and you can see that in this image. And so as I-30 project evolves, that is potential to change, but of course it is a TxDOT right away, so they will probably have some kind of high mast lighting to elevate or light the roadway. But you can see that one in this image. So that's probably 200 feet from the exact part where this monopole would be.
And is there any opportunity to co-locate these together or to otherwise combine this to minimize the number of these elements that we would have in the public realm?
I'm not sure if they'd be able to locate high mast lighting with wireless equipment. Applicant can answer that, but that is going to be sort of wrapped up in TxDOT engineering regulations.
Right, or even if there were two poles in close proximity. So then the existing site is actually integrated with a building that surrounds it. So on the street plane, at least, it's more integrated within the site. Are there any existing locations? And again, this may be a question for the applicant. Do you know if there were any existing locations, existing buildings that were perhaps evaluated?
I'm not sure if they evaluated other existing buildings that would have the height that they need, but they can speak to that further. The existing tower was surrounded by the old Eddie Dean's building. That building, I believe, is gone. And part of the reason they're moving is because of the expansion and the condemnation of that site, as I understand it, and the work by TxDOT there currently. So that one was kind of surrounded by a building, but there aren't structural buildings in the surrounding area, at least within 500, 600 feet. So they can speak to how much other buildings, like as we've discussed, the convention center, if that would be viable or not, and what the downsides to that would be.
Okay. And then you had also mentioned in your briefing that you had looked at this with the future plans for I-30. Obviously, Lamar Street and Botham Jean, it's a main gateway into the Cedars. I know there's a lot of streetscapes improvements. Cadiz, when you get to the other side of Botham Jean, it's the boulevard with the planting. How does this site integrate with those plans, and as we know them to date?
Yes. So let's see if I can pull up larger. So overall, I-30, large project, currently has a lot of clover leaves and excess right-of-way. Generally, the plan and the hope is that some of that excess right-of-way is freed up as they kind of canyonize it and slim down the exit ramps and whatnot in order to make some more developable land along the I-30 corridor. And so our urban design team did give recommendations to TxDOT and say, yeah, here's where, it'd be good to move some things around, put a gateway, put other facilities. They kind of looked at the amount of developable land that would be created. There's probably 6 or 7 other parcels of theoretically developable land along the corridor. And when we say developable, that's A, subject to TxDOT's how they want to deal with what would be their excess property, and B, the timeline of the project, which of course can be quite long. However, this is the westernmost of the sites that was considered technically developable or excess land that would be shed by the canyonization or the further canyonization of I-30. And so the way that this fits in is that they actually did consider our design team when they looked at, there is an existing antenna tower on the north side of the site. Where else can that fit, given the larger scope of the project, given there's only so much excess land being created. This was actually identified as one of the better sites because it is smaller. It does currently have a grade to it. There are larger sites. You can even see it in this aerial image to the east. There's a couple big clover leaves there, closer to the Ambassador, that those could be freed up as potentially developable land. But this one was actually one of the smaller excess parcels from the I-30 project that urban design said, yeah, this might interfere the least with potential redevelopment along the corridor. And then I have reviewed, I-30 plan and some of the urban design recommendations. There is a pedestrian way along South Lamar Bridge. This is farther north than that, and it shouldn't limit that. And then along Cadiz, there are proposed for streetscape and street tree improvements. The width of the right-of-way, 100 feet here, should not prohibit them from doing that in front of this tower site if that occurs, so where they would have the full city engineering, but I don't have information as to whether they would or when that would happen or who's paying for it, but I will say that the right-of-way should be there since it's a 100-foot right-of-way called for by the CBD thoroughfare plan.
Okay, and 2 final questions, if I may, Mr. Chair. On the site location, it appears that the new proposed site is significantly larger, just visually looking at it in width, than the current site. Do you know why that's requested by the applicant?
I don't necessarily know why. In comparison to the existing site, they might be able to give a technical reason for that. They have 3 cabinets that are described in the site plan, and then the tower at the center of it, and then an attached parking space. This one, just for anyone who can't make it out, it's 40 by 60. But they might be able to clarify a technical reason for that. But when we did look at it, the existing site, it is probably 50-60% larger. And so the total on this one was 2,400 square feet. I'm trying to see if I can, I'm sorry, I was trying to see if I could find the existing site kind of in a easy to find. There we go. So it's actually right here. And it was kind of wrapped around by the Eddie Dean's building, but that one's gone, and this site is under construction, I believe.
Yes, it is. And then final question, on the perimeter of this, I think it's called out on the site plans as chain link with barbed wire. Is that something that, I know it's perhaps typical on other sites, but in an urban area like this, is that anything that staff evaluated?
There would be other possible screening considerations that could be included. So we did evaluate it. Isolated nature of the site at this time, it could make sense for it, but if we're thinking in the larger I-30 vision, it would be possible to include conditions for different types of screening and fencing.
Okay, and is it correct that when they go for their site plan at building inspection, that they'll be required to comply with Article 10 for landscaping?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
May I request that this item be held or heard individually, please?
Yes, this has been taken off consent.
Thank you. I apologize. I had some audio issues joining the meeting.
No
Thank
worries
you,
at all.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Questions, commissioners?
We got one.
Please.
Relative to residential proximity slope, and just for my own knowledge, how does that work with a multi-story apartment building?
Yeah, great question. So it's different in every district, every PDs especially, it's going to work differently. The surrounding area is a mixed use PD. So it's not, in this case, it's not generating RPS, but we kind of went ahead and said, let's look at it as if residential properties nearby were generating residential proximity slope. It still wouldn't violate that with the nearest residential properties, which are farther southeast. So it's kind of twofold. The mixed use around it doesn't generate RPS, but we kind of evaluated it like residential properties could, but even then it didn't violate that. But generally, multifamily does generate some RPS, just to answer your question more broadly, in certain circumstances. But this is a PD, a mixed-use PD, so it doesn't apply here, but we still kind of we gave residential properties a consideration nonetheless.
Yeah, that's good information. I'm wondering because I'm thinking about the future ramifications of another development or any things that may happen, and if that tower would inhibit or prohibit those developments, just kind of looking at the future development of that area.
Prohibit in what way? Or inhibit?
I mean, for instance, then residential proximity slope would come into play, which then would, just from my own knowledge. So if it doesn't come into play, then I know.
Yeah, this site, so there's a site across the street, it's undeveloped. It's in the same zoning category as this site. If they built residential there tomorrow, which they could by right, it won't generate proximity slope, or like from a technical or regulatory perspective. We just evaluated existing conditions to say, does this honor it? And it did. But if a property across the street said, I'm residential now, or we're building residential now, it wouldn't generate anything like that because of how the PD works.
Commissioner Young?
And just to follow up to Commissioner Anderson's question, the staff's consideration of the proximity slope was not just some let's pretend game. The code charges us with considering how the slope would impact, or how the site would impact the slope, even though we're not bound by it.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the distinction. Any other questions on this item, commissioners? Okay, we'll keep moving. Case number 6. Ms. Munoz, good morning.
This next item is Z212331. It's an application for an MU1 district on property that's currently zoned an IR district with deed restrictions that are being volunteered by the applicant that restrict everything but 12 uses. Ultimately, the applicant is proposing a 100-unit mixed income housing development with a small mixed-use component, and the site has about 2.34 acres. It's located in northwest Dallas, south of North Haven Road. north of Royal Lane and east of Denton Drive. And here's an aerial shot of the site. As you can see, it's mostly undeveloped with some auto-related use on the western portion of the property. And then here's the surrounding zoning. We do have a multifamily to the north, and it's developed as such. And then to the east, we have an R75A with single-family uses across Dennis Road. To the south, we do have an auto service center, office, showroom, warehouse, and to the west, additional mini warehouse uses, all located in an IR district, just like the subject site. There were some corrections that I wanted to note. Under the uses permitted, which are to remain, I did specify the personal service uses which are being deed restricted. So all other personal service uses will be permitted, except those ones that are shown in the list. And then under the parking section, there's a correction to the ratio or my math, which was done incorrectly. 50 spaces would be required plus guest parking for the 100 dwelling units under the mixed income housing development bonus program. And then the volunteer deed restrictions were updated to include a definition for short-term rentals, which are prohibited in those deed restrictions as proposed. Now we are touring the site. We are on Sundial, which terminates onto Dennis and straight into the area of request. And more closely from Dennis Road onto the property. And now the surrounding land uses. Here we have, there's multifamily farther to the north. The MU site to the north has been demolished. And that's this property here. That was previously rezoned with deed restrictions as well. And now we're looking north on Dennis Road. You see those single family uses to the east, but they are all using it as a rear yard. So what you largely see are fences facing Dennis Road. And then across Sundial, there are some uses that as you turn onto Sundial, they do have corner lots there. So you do see the single family uses. This is the office, showroom, warehouse, and other uses that are to the south and west, which are all in the IR district as well. So the IR district prohibits residential uses, and they're trying to do a mixed use residential development. And so they've requested this district, but the mixed use so that they can have that retail personal service component in the ground level of the development. And so this is just a comparison as also shown in the case report of those land uses and what's being deed restricted out. Generally, the development standards here, as you see, the biggest change would be an actual reduction in height to 120 feet or 9 stories. But both districts would be held accountable to RPS, which as you see is across Dennis. So it's not truly a loss. And what's really changing are the land uses for the site. Now, based on the MVA category for the site, the MIHDB program offers certain incentives. I've highlighted those here in yellow, and depending on what they choose to provide, they could receive density bonuses, and then additionally, they get the parking reduction. So those are the two benefits of providing affordable housing at this site. Staff recommendation is approval, and it would be subject to the deed restrictions that are volunteered by the applicant and with the changes that I noted, so as briefed.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ms. Munoz. Questions? Commissioner Treadway.
Hi, good morning. Just one question. Did you say that the deed restrictions, the property to the north that had the deed restrictions, that property is now completely changed? Because I was just curious about how these deed restrictions compared to the ones in the adjacent property.
They're the same.
They are the same? Okay,
Yes.
then one specific thing, I noticed that paraphernalia shop is still permitted. What does that cover?
Paraphernalia shop is the more recently added use in the personal service uses. And so that's specific to different types of items that are sold as defined as a paraphernalia use.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Items that are described or defined as paraphernalia.
What are those items?
I'll have to pull up the definition for you. Just one moment.
I think bongs are smoking paraffin.
Ms. Munoz, may I clarify that the paraphernalia shop is on the list of deed-restricted uses? That's not an allowed use.
So it's not an allowed?
Right.
Okay, never mind, I'm good, because I got confused about that. So I thought that it was, I'm good. I don't have any more questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Standard?
Yes. Good morning, Ms. Munoz. I do have a question because in your presentation, and I keep getting confused about this because we had one discussion here at the CPC and then I believe it changed at City Council, but I want to clarify. You said initially that it would be 50 parking spaces plus 15% guest parking. And then though, under the mixed income, it's saying 50 spaces with 15% of them having to be guest parking spaces. So I guess my question is, and this keeps coming up with other cases too, and I am concerned that if you only have 50 spaces for the residents, and yet that's also supposed to be the guest parking, you know, is that adequate? So what is the ruling on that, please?
Daniel, do you have any input on that? Do you mind helping me out with that?
I'm sorry, Commissioner, can you repeat the question?
Yes, my question is this, is that this keeps coming up with a lot of these mixed income housing where you get the benefits of that on the parking. And when Ms. Munoz gave her initial presentation, she said under the mixed income it would be 50 spaces, because it's 100 units, plus 15% guest parking. That was in her presentation. But then in the case report, under mixed income, it says the 50 spaces includes the 15% guest parking. So my question is, which is it? And if it's including the 15, I keep getting concerned that 50 spaces for 100, even under mixed income, and then that's also the guest parking, I'm not sure that's adequate. But I'm really asking for which one it is on this case, and in general with mixed income.
Give me 1 second to look that up, Commissioner.
Because originally we decided one thing here, and then when it went to City Council, it changed. We had done originally the 0.5 and then plus 15, and then when it got to City Council, I believe they revised that. So I'm not sure where it is now.
So this is the code section that we have that's currently uploaded, but the reason I'm asking Daniel is because I'm not certain if this is the most updated one, as you're mentioning, Commissioner Standard. But as per the code, it states that at least 15% of the required parking must be available for guest parking. So Daniel, if you wouldn't mind just confirming whether or not this is the latest version, I'd really appreciate that.
Yeah, and my concern is then that brings it down that the people living there have 35 spaces, basically. Well, 42 spaces. Here it's 15%. I was counting 50. But 42 spaces for 100 units. And that just seems awfully low to me, but.
Can I attempt? So this is a general zoning change. It's not a PD. We don't approve a different parking ratio, so it's per code. And I understand that we can do scenarios. It's a minimum ratio. There is obviously a nuance between the bonus that you have in case you provide affordable housing, but they may choose not to provide affordable housing. They may choose to build without that bonus. So again, it's a general zoning change. It's not, you can obviously take into consideration all the scenarios and what ifs, but It's not a PD, and again, keep in mind, it's minimum parking. It's not maximum, it's not what they will provide and stuff like that. Yes.
I understand that, but it was presented two different ways, so I was trying to clarify. In the presentation, it was presented as plus 15, and then in the case report, it was including 15. So I was trying to make sure that I was clear that it includes the 15 and that that's where we are.
Yeah, I think it's a difference between the parking that is minimum required if it's not with the bonus. The way it's written in the code, it says that you need to have visitors parking, but it depends. Is it gated? Is it free access? And then depending on that, is it additional or included in what you're providing? So with the mixed income housing bonus, the code says that it's included in your required.
So if they don't use the mixed income, are they saying that it's plus the 15% for the guest parking?
It depends. It depends if they gate it or not, if it's free access. So it's a lot of nuances to the code and permitting. It depends. If it's behind the gate, but again, it goes back to determination that is done at permitting depending on how it's laid out, how it's accessible. The way we read it, if it's behind the gate and it's restricted, then it has to be in addition. But if it's not, it can be included in the required one. I think the key point is if you have a visitor, they need to have access to it. If it's gated, they don't have access to it.
Interesting nuance.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions on this item, commissioners? Okay, before we go to the next item, let the record reflect that Commissioner Wheeler joined us this morning, 9:43 a.m. Good morning. And we will keep moving. Case number 7. Ms. Munoz.
Case number 7 is Z212334. This is an application for a specific use permit for an alcoholic beverage establishment limited to a bar, lounge, or tavern use on property located in the Deep Ellum near East Side Special Purpose District. It's on about 1/4 of an acre located on the north side of Main Street and Prior Street. And the use last operated under SUP 2144, which expired in April of 2022. And the SUP had been maintained since it was initiated back in 2015, but the applicant failed to resubmit before expiration. And then additionally, they said that they had closed down for a period of time, and now they're reopening under new management. They did provide an alcohol survey that shows that there is a charter school in the vicinity. This always comes up in Deep Ellum. However, according to our code, Deep Ellum is specifically exempt from having to comply with those protected uses. So the property again is located in Deep Ellum. And here's an aerial map showing the developed nature of Main Street. And in the vicinity, we have lots of restaurants, bars, and surface parking, and all the surrounding areas also within Tract A of PD 269. There are proposed SUP conditions which staff agrees to except for the time limit which they've requested, a 2-year period with automatic renewals, which is something that staff would prefer to maintain the 2 years. They did provide also, although there are no changes to the structure, a clearer site plan than what was previously approved, which was more of a survey. This one shows more specifically the details of the structure, and then again has this zoning component, the table that shows the details of the site and the land use. And now here are photos of the subject site from Main Street and the surrounding land uses. This is to the east. And now we're looking down Main Street, and this is across. and at the intersection of Pryor and Main. This is adjacent to the west and looking west toward Main Street. So staff recommendation is approval for a 2-year period subject to a site plan, and staff's recommended conditions is brief that show the plan. The reason why I put as brief is because the plan that I put in the report did not remove the shading from the structure, but that's the only change to the site plan here that I showed you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Munoz. Questions, commissioners? Okay, thank you very much. Let's go on to case number 8. Let the record reflect that Commissioner Young has a conflict on this item and has stepped out of the chamber. Mr. Pepe.
Good morning again. So item 8 is going to be Z212336. It's an application for a specific use permit for a tower antenna for cellular communication on property zoned sub-area 2 within Plan Development District number 366, the Buckner Boulevard Special Purpose District with a D1 liquor control overlay. The purpose of this request is to allow for a new tower antenna for cellular communication, which requires an SUP in the zoning district. Here's the site off of Buckner. This is the overall site as it exists today. To the north, there's the auto service center. To the east, there's single family. To the south, there's single family. And to the west, there's vehicle display, sales, and service. Property is currently zoned, or excuse me, it's currently undeveloped, and it's zoned sub-area 2 within PD 366. And per the PD, additional regulations of the definition of cellular antenna still apply. The applicant is proposing a 65-foot monopole tower with an additional 5-foot lightning rod. Within sub-area 2, the use just outright requires an SUP. And again, the code states that if an SUP is required for the cellular use, it may be exempt from RPS, but we should do an evaluation of RPS. In this case, it's in the furthest feasible distance from an RPS point of origination that it could be on the site, the location described on the development plan. The applicant requests the SUP for a tower antenna for cellular communication for a 10-year period with automatic renewal for additional 10-year periods thereafter. So when we get into the site, here is the site as it stands today. It does have a 6-foot masonry fence around it right now. And this is the north side of the property. It's the entrance to the adjacent auto service center, adjacent car wash, undeveloped property across Connor Drive, and more of the auto service center. And that's back looking south on Connor Drive. It's a residential property that's adjacent to the overall property, but it is far south from the subject site. And then here's the site plan as it's being proposed in elevation. A little more detail on that in terms of the location, height. And so their conditions are pretty standard for wireless communication. They have a time limit of 10 years. They have a co-location for other carriers. They have a maximum height of 70 feet and everything else that you typically see with the SUP conditions. So staff recommendation is a period of 10 years with eligibility for automatic renewals for additional 10-year periods subject to a site/elevation plan and conditions.
Thank you very much. Questions, commissioners? No questions?
Quick question.
Yes, Commissioner Stanton.
No, because I heard you say that it's the furthest point away from the houses, correct? Is that what you were saying?
It's the furthest point
On the property away
on
from
the property that it could be to mitigate RPS.
Okay.
You'll notice, so there are two nearby points that generate RPS. This one on the south is a residential home, and then across to the east, there's also residential property. They are outside, they're significantly outside of the RPS line from the property to the south. So they're under that slope. So they've moved up far enough north on the site, so they're out of the slope of that site. They have an overage of the RPS being generated from the east by approximately 10 feet coming from the east, but they are as far back on the site as they can be from that point of origination. And so the overage there is 10 from RPS. However, there are some trees on the site to the north. Sorry. So if it's kind of a balance, it's like if you moved it farther north, you conflict with those trees, and of course, you know, those can be removed, but we're looking at an SUP, which is temporary by nature to some degree. And so you're as far west on the site from the RPS being generated from the east, and you're far enough north on the site so as to not conflict with RPS from the south, but you're not conflicting with those existing trees that are on the northwest corner of the site. So it kind of strikes a happy medium where it is in our analysis.
Great explanation. Thank you. I'm glad you told me about the trees. That makes sense. Thanks.
I was just imagining the neighborhood as you're describing it. It's spot on. Thank you, Mr. Pepe. Any other questions, commissioners? Okay, let the record reflect that Commissioner Young is going to step back into the chamber and that Commissioner Blair is now stepping out of the chamber. She has a conflict on case number 9. Ms. Munoz, back to you.
Thank you very much, Chair Shadid. Our next case is Z212340. This property is located in the Redbird neighborhood south of Boulder Park Trail and the Redbird Dallas Executive Airport, west of Marvin D. Love Freeway. I lost a slide there, I believe, but here is a view of the zoning map and the surrounding land uses. We do have an R10 district located to the northwest, and there are undeveloped lots and then 2 churches there. To the west, across Pastor Bailey, there's an MC1 district. There's remote parking that has an agreement for the church use, and then additional office uses. To the southwest, we do have retail uses and regional retail district farther to the south. And then adjacent to the site to the south, we have an MF2 district that is currently undeveloped. To the east, we have different districts, including a CR district, an SUP that has a mini warehouse, MPD 396. And there's a mix of undeveloped and warehouse uses, and then additional retail that's all at the major intersection there. And here's an aerial map showing the development in the vicinity. The church is a rather large site. They do have a conservation easement to the east, which this whole green area that you see will not ever be developed unless they were to go through a major exercise of amending or terminating that conservation easement. They tried it once before with me, actually. I had this case several years ago. That case was eventually terminated because they just don't plan to ever touch that. Currently, with this request, they don't plan to do any new structures. They're just amending the PD to allow the daycare facility or childcare facility as a main use. which I'll show you on my next slide, but here it also shows the development. Here we have the mini warehouse use located to the southeast, and then those retail uses to the south with that one parcel directly to the south that's undeveloped. Then you see all the office uses to the west and the surface parking, and then to the northwest, the undeveloped single family district and the other churches and the Boulder Park Trail system to the north. So this PD was initially established in 1978. It has not changed in its configuration. It still has the 24 acres. They're seeking to have the childcare facility operated as a separate main use. And for that reason, in order to obtain a CO for it, it has to be a permitted use in the PD. So they are just amending the allowable uses within this PD. And while they are doing that, we're doing 2 uses because the definitions for these 2 uses under Chapter 51 specify who would be the operator for that childcare facility. So if the church decides to operate the childcare facility, it's considered a community welfare or health center use. And if an outside entity that's not affiliated with the church were to operate the childcare facility, then they would be considered a childcare facility. So for that reason, they've elected to add both uses to the PD, and this is under the direction of our zoning team over in the permit division so that they could be sure to get what they need out of this amendment. And in the report, I do have those specific definitions to these 2 land uses. As you see on the community welfare health center, it includes a service that's provided by public, quasi-public, tax-exempt church or municipal agency, where the other one does not. And so this is the existing and last approved development plan for the PD. There was a minor amendment that was done, so this is the latest version that we have in the PD folder, and they are not proposing any changes to this or to the church use or spaces. And then here are photos of the subject site off of Pastor Bailey. And then more interior to the site, lots of surface parking. And then here are the adjacent uses to the north and looking north on Pastor Bailey. And then now we're to the south and to the southeast. And to the south, the undeveloped lot, and then those retail uses. This is to the west, the surface parking and the office district. And staff recommendation is approval subject to conditions.
Thank you, Ms. Munoz. Questions, commissioners? Any questions on this item? No questions? Okay. The record reflect that Commissioner Blair is stepping back into the chamber. We'll keep moving to case number 10. Again, commissioners, just for review, our consent agenda docket consists of cases 5, 6, and 7. 3, 4, 8, and 9 have come off. Mr. Mulkey, back to you, sir. I believe you're going to brief updates on this one.
Yes, sir. Okay, yeah, this is case C212187. This was held under advisement to this meeting back at the February 5th meeting. Just a brief refresher over the request. It's a PD for both TH2A and R5A district uses on properties owned in R75A single family district located on the southeast line of Ed Road between Garden Grove and Sullivan. And it's just shy of 23 acres. So you can see it's in the southeast section of the city in District 8. Aerial map, just as a visual reminder, and zoning map. You can see those surrounding single-family uses, undeveloped property. There's also a library and a public school directly across the street. It is currently undeveloped. They're proposing to develop it with a site with a mix of single-family townhouses and single-family detached homes, also proposing several amenities for the site. And to do this, they're proposing a PD with 2 sub-areas. Sub-area A has a TH2A base district, sub-area B has an R5A base district, and they're also proposing modifications for setbacks, density, lot coverage, lot size, stories, and urban design standards. And then updates. So since the January 5th meeting, the applicant has revised their urban design standards and conceptual plan so that the perimeter lots of this development now face inward rather than outward. Staff and the applicant were able to come to consensus about that. Another change since then, pretty major, is that all lots in the development will now have rear-loaded garages accessed by an alley. So that will definitely improve the internal walkability of the site because there won't be a lot of conflicts between driveways and sidewalks. The entire development, including the common areas and walking trail, will now be developed in a single phase, so that phasing condition has been removed. And in the conditions, the minimum required open space has increased from 10% to 15%. Also, in the conditions that were published last Friday, the minimum lot size in sub-area B has decreased from 4,000 square feet to a minimum of 3,000 square feet. This is just the development standards comparison showing that change to the minimum lot size as it was published last Friday. This is the previous version of the development plan. And then the updated version of the development plan, you can see that now all lots within the subdivision are alley loaded and that there aren't any phasing conditions mentioned on the development plan or any kind of cross-section for driveways because those will all be rear loaded now. So with that, staff's updated recommendation is approval subject to a conceptual plan and conditions, and I'm available for any questions on those updates.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Treadway.
Did we get additional materials after this, or does this reflect the latest?
There were additional materials circulated to the commission earlier this week. That was a result of discussions between the district commissioner and the applicant. Those were not included in staff's briefing. We weren't able to get those into the briefing in time. So if those do want to be incorporated, if the commission makes a motion today, that will need to be added to the motion.
I'd like to make a motion to have them incorporated.
Oh, that would be done during the public hearing.
A motion to pass them at the hearing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you discuss them, or do we have to wait?
Staff doesn't really have an opinion on those changes. They're pretty minor. We really didn't have time to incorporate those before the hearing today. We're not a big fan of last minute changes in general. So if those want to be incorporated, they'll need to be added to the motion.
I believe we're going to be putting those changes on the record here briefly, just for the benefit of the body. Commissioner Carpenter.
Can I put them on the record? Do you want me to do it now?
If you don't mind, Commissioner Carpenter. Yeah, let's go ahead and put those on the record. Please, Commissioner Blair.
Okay. Here are the changes that was discussed with the applicant. There was that sub-area B is the only main uses permitted in sub-area B will be handicap group dwelling units, local utilities, retirement housing, and single family. The goal of sub-area B is, can you do me a favor, please, Mr. Mulkey, and put up the conceptual plan? The current, the new one with the rear loaded? Yeah. No, with the rear loaded, the other one. No, the other one with the rear. Oh, that is it, duh. The ideal, yeah, that one. The ideal is that the area in orange is single family, 1-story housing for age appropriate residents. So that would be residents that are over the age of 55 as 51A defines retirement housing. Those housing units will open up directly to the walking path that goes around that detention. That is not a detention pond, it is a retention pond with a water feature that is ungated with a walking trail around it. The goal is for the senior residents to have direct access to that walking trail and the pond as a water feature and a health benefit for them. There is 2 walking trails that are also in orange that gives walkability from the exterior and through the middle of the development directly to the walking trail around the pond and the common area, playground, whatever green space it's going to be that is connected to the detention pond. Okay? In the sub-area A, they're all townhouses with a minimum story of 2, and it has a maximum density of 190 units. The concept plan shows 181. Excuse me. The single family is minimum of 10 feet between each group of 8 single family houses. The setback is 10 feet in the front. The minimum lot size is 2,000 with a maximum lot coverage of 65%. In sub-area B, the maximum height is 30 feet instead of 35. It has a 60% lot coverage, and the minimum lot size is 3,200 square feet, which is shown on the conceptual plan. And like I said, it has a maximum number of story of 1. Signs was forgotten, it was put back in, and like Mr. Mulkey said, that all lots in both sub-areas are rear-loaded and accessed by an alley. Then the other only change is the fencing. The fencing if there's fencing in the front, it's limited to 4, on sub-area B, is limited to 4 feet to give the residents some privacy, but it must be 50% clear. So 50% of it must be clear, and it still has the same type of building materials. Is that the appropriate way to say it? And that's it. Like Mr. Mulkey said, they're basically minor changes, just clean up. Adjustments to make it consistent and flow smoothly.
Thank you, Commissioner Blair. Questions? Commissioner Carpenter, then Commissioner Wheeler, then Commissioner Stannard.
Yes, Mr. Mulkey, my question is about the distinction or difference between a detention pond and a detention/retention pond. I know 15% of the area is required to be open space. Does a detention/retention pond count as open space?
In the conditions for this case, it does. We've discussed, we have some boilerplate conditions describing what can be considered usable open space that we use, and we've discussed removing groundwater recharge, detention, retention, all that kind of stuff from something that would count as usable open space. However, with this particular PD, with the design of the site, it would count towards that. Detention, retention, I'll do my best to explain. I'm hoping Mr. Navarez is listening in. He can kind of go a little bit further. But a detention pond, speaking as the planner, it's much less aesthetically pleasing. It's basically just to detain water, and that's pretty much it. A retention pond, I'm way outside my depth here, but I believe in addition to detaining water, it also allows for seepage into the water table, something. I'm way outside my depth. Again, speaking as the planner, the one who doesn't know all of the engineering stuff, when you add retention to a site functionally, it does serve a better function. I'll let David chime in on that. And then another thing, because planners, we just make stuff pretty, that is required with this detention retention pond is that it's circled by a walking trail with seating. It has a water fountain feature that will be required with it. So it's not just to, meet engineering requirements for the development, it's also to provide an aesthetic feature for the residents.
So does that mean it doesn't have to be fenced? Because the detention pond has to be fenced, my understanding, but if...
Correct, yeah,
So
I believe this one would not need to be fenced under the PD conditions. Mr. Tavares might be able to chime in a little bit more about what would be required at permitting in terms of fencing for detention retention.
Thank you.
We will ask him then. Commissioner Wheeler.
So I know one of my concerns, well, the only concern that I had about this property the last time we visited it was concerning whether we were going to ask for parallel parking. But in between the alleys on both Garden Grove and Ed Road, is there going to be a fence in between that and the sidewalk, or is it something that's going to kind of, being since that now they're turning the driveways outward? The driveways on Garden Grove and Ed now would kind of face the street, right?
No, so that's one of the major changes with this update since the last meeting is the lots along the perimeter development. The design we originally negotiated with the applicant was that those would face outwards towards Garden Grove and Ed and have, direct frontage onto those streets. Big change with this one is that they now do face internally, and there is a requirement for a wall, a fence, essentially along the perimeter of the development, so it's a little more inward facing. And then, from the property line where that fence is, you'd have the sidewalk, the wall, and then immediately beyond that wall is the alley for the rear-loaded garages of the homes, and then you'd have the homes themselves.
Okay, because I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't just seeing straight the alley and the driveways from those two streets. Is the applicant going to be here today? We kind of requested
I sure do hope so. They've signed up to speak.
Okay, because I know that was
we'll
one of the
see this
things,
afternoon.
a lot of our questions we were asking, the applicant could have answered. So hopefully they'll be here today. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Agreed.
Thank you. Commissioner Standard.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mulkey. I have a couple of questions. One, you've gone from 50% lot coverage to 60% lot coverage. And you've made the lots on the single families down from 4,000 to 3,000. And my understanding on the townhouses is the rear yard is 5 feet, is that correct?
So in a TH district, there are no front side or rear
So it's
setbacks.
just the 0,
0
okay.
feet,
Because
yeah.
I saw in a former thing, it mentioned a 5 foot, and so that's whatever. I am concerned about this green space thing. I understand it's supposed to do the landscaping on chapter 10 or whatever we call it, but where would you put trees on this? I mean, it seems to me that what we've done is we've got this one common area in the middle, then we're calling the retention pond green space, which quite frankly, I question that in a community like this. Just my opinion, so that's not a question. However, my question is, where are you going, what is the landscaping outside of the common area that's going to be in this space?
Right, yeah, so the development will be required to comply with Article 10, like straight Article 10. For more specific details, I sure am glad Philip Irwin is here today.
Oh, yay, we've got our specialist expert here, good. I mean, I'm not sure I've articulated well, but do you see my concerns from how much available space,
Certainly.
you know, and I'm assuming there's sidewalks in front of these houses, is that correct? So
I
where
would
does a
assume
tree go, I guess is my question.
Okay. This is going to be single-family construction mostly with townhouse. So essentially, under Article 10, single-family residential is depending on the size of the property that the structure's on. So for a townhouse under 4,000 square feet, be one new tree on the property. For up to 7,500 square feet, it's 2 trees, and then above that, it's 3 trees. And then in the common areas that basically provide site trees if that area actually triggers an Article 10 landscape. Otherwise, they'll be planting trees to complete tree mitigation.
Okay, I understand that, but my concern is on the 2,000 square foot lots that are being covered by 60%, the houses, these are townhouses, and you've got a sidewalk in front of that. Where is any green space or trees on those townhouse lots?
I can't say until I actually see a plan as to where any green space is on the lot.
Well, I guess I'm feeling like I'm approving a plan potentially that there won't be enough green space on those lots to put trees. That's my concern, that all of the green space is in the center of this development and that there won't be any green space outside of it or just negligible.
It sounds like yard space is probably going to be available, but to a minimum amount. Ordinance requires one large or medium tree in a location. As to how they apply that and also the structure, they need to design it accordingly to be able to meet all parts of the ordinance.
So under townhouse, just so I'm clear, if they're 2,000 square foot lots, what would be the requirement under code? Would that still be every certain 1,000 feet that you put a tree?
No, it'd be
No.
1 tree per single family
Per
lot.
2,000 square foot lot, okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Houseright.
Mr. Mulkey, kind of a point of clarification for my edification here. You mentioned in townhouse that, you know, there's no setbacks, I believe is what you said. On this exhibit that we're looking at, the townhouse lots appear to have building lines, dotted lines. Is that just a suggestion or?
That was something that literally since I started reviewing this case nearly a year ago, I heavily advised the preparer of this plan to not put on a conceptual plan for a zoning case. I don't think that ever clicked for them that might create issues at permitting if they want to veer from those building lines. I can't say one way or the other. I don't work in permitting. One eventually reaches a point where one needs to take a case to CPC because one cannot continue to make the same comment over and over again. Maybe that's a little messy way to answer that question, but there it is.
Now, what those lines do successfully illustrate is the gap between a certain number of units. So that part's right. But to Commissioner Stannard's conversation, if this in fact represented what they did, there would be a small front yard to place a tree in.
That is correct. Yeah, and I will say too, you know, just as we were talking earlier about how, you know, mixed income housing parking requirements are just a minimum, they can go beyond that. The minimum setbacks in a TH district are 0 feet. That's not a maximum setback as well. Yeah.
Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Will the client make enhancements to the sidewalks as indicated on the site?
Could you say that one more time? I'm sorry.
Will the client make the enhancements to the sidewalks that are shown going around the community?
Right, yeah, so that is another, more of a minor change since the last time. On January 5th, we did have specific conditions written in the PD for the dimensions and landscape buffers of the sidewalks along Garden Grove and Ed, so the exterior sidewalks. Since then, we've updated the condition for internal sidewalks to require specific dimensions. So before it was kind of general, but now it says minimum unobstructed sidewalk width of 5 feet with a minimum 5-foot wide buffer is required along internal public streets. So that will be required at permitting because it's written in the PD that way.
Okay, thank you. Well, my second question is, who made the determination on retention versus detention?
So that's we're still kind of developing our boilerplate conditions and really considering taking any kind of detention or retention out of the consideration for open space. However, up until this point, we've always recommended that if an applicant is proposing a detention pond, that it also be used for retention.
Well, I'm just wondering if engineers made those decisions in order to actually, because I know the area will require either a detention or a retention, and then those ramifications would then have to come down into the project. So I'm just trying to see if there was a decision made from some kind of authority on what's required there in terms of detention or retention.
Yeah, so what's in this PD is what we as staff have determined is a good idea for the zoning case. This is just the first stop on the line, so when it does get to permitting, all of our standard engineering requirements for detention, retention, those will also be applied.
So they review water runoff and all that stuff?
That's correct, yeah. It would have to meet all code in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Mulkey.
Thank you. Second round, Commissioner Stanner.
Yes, I forgot to ask you my second question, which is, one of the things that came up at our last hearing was about, because we moved the driveways to the back, to the alley, because there was that whole parking issue, if you recall. So my question goes to the width of these streets. What are the widths of these streets? To make sure they can accommodate the parking, guest parking in front of the houses, the townhouses.
So hoping I could zoom in on this a little bit more. But the labels on the conceptual plan for those new streets that will be installed is 50 feet. So that would be the 50-foot right-of-way.
Which ends up being about 35 feet literally from curb to curb is what we're talking about, which is ample to have that. Perfect. Okay. I just wanted to make sure we had answered the parking issue by the width of the streets.
Yeah, so again, from the jump with this case, we were really recommending that all the homes be alley loaded because that solves the issue of the conflict between driveways and sidewalks. It also solves the issue of on-street parking.
Yeah, it's much cleaner this way. Thanks very much.
Commissioner Young.
Yes, am I correct that the streets and alleys shown on the conceptual plan will be public rights-of-way?
The streets, for sure. I believe alleys are also public. David's here. Hi, David. You want to come on down and help me out here?
Good morning, Commissioners. Oh, this is right eye level. Back here. Are those screens for you? Very nice. Good morning, Commission.
Good morning. Commissioner Young, can you repeat your question, sir?
Yes, am I correct that the streets and alleys shown on the conceptual plan will be public rights-of-way?
That is correct, yes, sir. The way the site plan is drawn out, platting these roads will be public, both alleys and streets.
Okay.
In compliance with the dimensions.
And for Mr. Mulkey, that in turn means that they cannot be counted as part of the lot area?
That's correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Any other questions, Commissioners? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mulkey.
Thank you.
We'll go on to case number 11. I believe that we'll brief updates on this case as well.
Thank you, Tricia. Did B212304? Did you want me to go through the whole presentation or just the changes mentioned? Commissioner Stan?
Did we not brief it the last time? No? Okay. Briefing, please.
Thank you. This is an application for a new sub-district located in PD number 1. And the purpose of the request is to create the new sub-district to allow a second story in the text of the PD and to permit the expansion of an existing structure that will allow a proposed 15,820 square foot bank or savings and loan office. And this would remain the sole use in this structure as proposed, and they would have 2 drive-through aisles. The property is located in North Dallas. It's on the south line of Forest Lane, west of Eastern Avenue, and west of the Dallas North Tollway. Here's the property. As you see, it's developed. It currently has a bank use there. We see single-family uses developed to the south of the site, and PD1 extends all across Forest Lane in this section here. So those are all the remaining lots or parcels in PD1. And since the PD contains all of these developed properties, in order to change for this one lot that has different ownership, they have to create a sub-district to make any amendments to the PD conditions or the plan for the site. So here we have existing land uses to the north in the CR district. There's a car wash, retail, and restaurant uses. And then to the east, we have an office use in PD number 1, the single family to the south, as I noted, in the R16 district. And the remainder of PD1 has a lodge use and other office uses. Here are photos of the site from Forest Lane. And looking east on Forest Lane, this is the alleyway that separates the property from the residential uses. And the existing bank with multiple drive-through aisles, which would be reduced to just 2. And part of that structure would be incorporated, and then the additional story put atop the building to make it over 15,000 square feet. And now the surrounding land uses, those retail and personal service restaurant uses located to the north across Forest Lane and the car wash use. And then the office located to the east, single family to the south, and additional lodge and office uses to the west. This is the proposed overall site plan, which shows the expansion of that existing bank structure. And in working with the neighborhood, the applicant did revise the plan to show the mechanicals located towards the center of the roof structure. This is the existing overall site plan, which the reason why they're doing a text edit to explicitly allow 2-story structures is because this existing overall site plan has a note on it that says that all structures within this PD are permitted or limited to 2 stories. And then the text of the PD actually states that all structures are limited to 1 story, except as shown on this plan. But this plan says that all structures are permitted to go up to 2 stories. So for that conflict, they are adjusting the text to explicitly state 2 stories are permitted for this site. And this is the proposed new sub-district development plan. As I noted on the overall site plan, it shows that they have those mechanicals here towards the center, farther away from that residential adjacency to the south. And it just shows the expansion of that existing structure. They're still maintaining the exact setbacks and the parking configuration. And they're also maintaining several trees which are in that area. Since the 119 hearing, they did provide a revised development plan that creates a zone for lighting poles and a maximum height for those poles, which is shown now on this revised development plan. And then this was the existing development plan. As you can see, it's largely the same configuration, but it has that very large area of drive-through lanes with several drive-through lanes, which would all encompass part of that new structure instead, and then just maintain 2 drive-through lanes. And this is the new landscape plan. They are maintaining several of those trees that we saw surrounding the site in the site photos. They did, however, remove some unnecessary details with this revised plan and modified the plant and tree materials as required or discussed with our chief arborist. This was the existing landscape plan. In the proposed PD conditions, again, they're creating a sub-district. One of the big changes, excuse me one second. Excuse me. So one of the big changes is actually that they are adopting the Chapter 51A parking ratio for the bank use, rather than this PD generically applied one parking ratio for all uses that were permitted. And currently that included the bank use that was located at the site, but that was according to PD number 1. And now they've asked to revert to Chapter 51A, which is considered a reduction in the parking required, but supported by staff because it meets the current requirements for that land use. So they're also, of course, as I mentioned, codifying the allowable height and stories. And they've added some obscured second story windows in order to promote privacy for the adjacent residential uses. And then the special lighting provisions as well to just ensure that there's limited light pouring over into those residential properties. Finally, there's also a provision that was added for garbage removal times. However, staff does not support that element of the request. And for that reason, staff's recommendation is for approval subject to the revised overall site plan, a revised development plan, a revised landscape plan, and
Questions, Commissioner Stanner?
Yes, thank you for that excellent report. I just want to make sure that we can clarify a couple of things, which is, even though the original application included an application for this building to be 2 stories, as you have demonstrated in your report, in fact, the height is not changing. It's staying at 35 feet as the PD proposes, so there's no height change. And in fact, because both the development plans in the 60s and in 2008 showed 2 stories were allowed, and it references that they almost didn't need to apply for the 2 stories. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So what they really were applying for this, the main change that the applicant was applying for, was the parking. And the parking change was merely bringing it up to today's code, because if a financial institution came in today, it would be the 1 per 333 square feet as opposed to the 1 per 250 square feet. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then the other thing, after meeting with the neighbors, I see in your conditions that you've added the things, the lowered lights. And we've also added, because there's a 6-foot wall, and to make more screening, part of our landscape plan is to add 7-foot, what I call tree shrubs. I don't know what y'all call them, but we don't wait 20 years for live oaks. We're putting them in at 7 feet, and they will produce like a 2-foot screening very quickly above the 6-foot wall for the sake of the neighbors. Is that correct? That's the purpose. Correct?
My understanding, yes.
Yeah, your understanding is of that. So we have the lower lighting, the moving of the air conditioning to the middle of the building to prevent noise. We have the extra screening, and there'll be less traffic because it's being changed from 5 drive-throughs to 2 drive-throughs. And is that correct too? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I think that is all I've got, and you've done a wonderful job on this case. Thank you, Ms. Munoz.
Thank you both. Commissioner Young.
Yes. First of all, do I understand that staff recommends that the conditions provide for 2 allowable stories site-wide?
For this specific site, yes?
Okay, I'm looking at page 11-9, and I don't see that. It says, no structure may exceed 1 story in height except as noted on the site plan. So would it then be staff's conditions as briefed?
I'm looking at the case report on 11-9, and under stories, there's a B, and it says no structure may exceed 2 stories or 35 feet in height, whichever is more restrictive in Subdistrict 1.
Yes, but my question was site-wide, and I thought I heard you say that it didn't make sense to say 1 story except as shown on the site plan, and then the site plan shows 2 stories site-wide. Did I misunderstand that?
I'm not certain that I understand how you're phrasing this.
Well, I'm looking at section 111A, and it says 1 story except as noted on the site plan.
So I think, to be clear, this provision can be amended further to meet the needs. I guess it'll be more carefully considered when they're writing the ordinance. But I did have this reviewed by our city attorneys, and the B is what applies to this new site, Subdistrict 1, which says 2 stories.
Mr. Chair, if I may. Commissioner Young, you are correct. We need to add some language at the beginning of subsection A to create an exception that subsection B would apply to.
Right, except
Okay,
as.
but right now the exception is as noted on the site plan, and I guess my question is staff comfortable with that?
No, it would be according to B. So A would not apply. It would be B. No structure may exceed 2 stories or 35 feet in height.
Well, so are you recommending a change to section A or not?
No, because we can't amend A for the entire PD. So we're creating a subdistrict and creating an exception to A for Subdistrict 1.
Okay. Why is staff opposed to the garbage removal provision?
Because generally that is something that is difficult for the sanitation department to maintain. They're not accustomed to monitoring the times of garbage removal for private businesses who are contracting their own garbage removal services. And so this is something that would be difficult for sanitation or code compliance to monitor.
Are you aware that similar provisions to this are contained in a number of PDs around the city?
Absolutely.
Okay. Some technical questions about the PD conditions, which may just involve some cleanup on the part of the attorney's office. First of all, we labeled the portion where the bank and savings and loan is as Subdistrict 1, but there is no Subdistrict 2, 3, or 4. Is there any problem with that? In other words, can we have subdistricts in a PD and then parts of the PD that have no subdistrict? If that's okay, that's okay. I'm asking. I'm asking.
Don't we have the same situation in 193?
I was thinking about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we have one in PD 15 as well.
Yeah.
All right.
And if the decision comes to be that it's not okay, I think that when they're drafting the ordinance, they'll make the final decision.
Next is in section 1.106, which is labeled parking and which generally deals with parking, but then has a sentence at the end that says, additionally, the bank and savings and loan office use in Subdistrict 1 is subject to development impact review. It seems to me those are two different subjects.
And it can be removed and placed in the permitted uses section instead.
Okay. I think that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Young.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item, Commissioners? Okay. Commissioners, it is 10:52. Let's take our first break, 10-minute break. Commissioners, it is 11:09. Apologies, we're running a couple of minutes late. We're back on the record and moving to case number 12. Let the record reflect that Commissioner Carpenter has a conflict on this item and has stepped out of the chamber. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, case Z212186.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair? Is
Yes,
it
sir.
possible for staff to help us with the noise coming into this room that's very distracting to our business?
The noise up there?
Yes.
Let's see if we can close those doors. I believe that it's the mayor having a press conference. I'm not going anywhere near that. Just, Commissioner Housestrott, you must have missed that we had a briefing where the park board had a party during our briefing with noise and almost fireworks. There was dancing up there, and so
we clearly should have taken a recess.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
You ready for me?
Thank you, Lawrence.
Okay, Z212-186 is an application for a planned development district for MF2A multifamily district uses and office, general merchandise or food store, 3,500 square feet or less, restaurant without drive-in or drive-through service, and personal service uses on Tract 1, CH clustered housing district uses on Tract 2, and a tree preservation area on Tract 3. Property is located on the southeast corner of West Commerce Street and Neal Street. It's currently zoned IR and IM. Purpose of the request is to allow modified development standards primarily related to permitted uses, setbacks, density, height, landscaping, mixed income housing, and design standards to redevelop the site with multifamily and specified non-residential uses, approximately 8.636 acres. Located in District 6. Aerial map showing surrounding industrial uses and single-family properties to the south. Zoning map. The majority of the request site is currently zoned IM and is developed with an office warehouse use. Southeast portion of the area of request is zoned IR and is undeveloped. The request property is part of an existing industrial corridor that is along the Union Pacific Railroad line and is near but outside the boundaries of the area studies that are listed here. The wider area has generally been transitioning away from industrial uses. The subject site, though, is still surrounded on 3 sides by IRIM and is located on an active portion of the existing industrial corridor. The Forward Dallas Comprehensive Plan vision illustrates this area as part of an urban neighborhood building block characterized by being predominantly residential, but having a wide variety of housing options, concentrations of shops and offices along key corridors, mixed-use buildings with ground floor shops, and pedestrian-friendly streets. The application was initially a request for a general zoning change to multifamily 2A. However, staff recommended a PD in lieu of that general zoning change for a variety of reasons, such as ensuring that there is adequate buffering for the new residential units against the existing industrial uses, codifying approximately 2-acre tree preservation area to remain undeveloped, providing a transition in scale from existing single-family to higher density multifamily, allowing the introduction of some specified non-residential uses and requiring those at the ground floor along West Commerce Street, pedestrian-friendly streets, and increased percentage of affordable units at a wider variety of AMFI. So mixed income housing under 51A for a multifamily 2A district would allow the highlighted, what you're seeing highlighted in yellow, if the applicant were to have provided 5% at 81 to 100%, they would be eligible for all of the development bonuses that are highlighted in yellow, including a max height of 85 feet, a lot coverage of 85%, and half space per dwelling unit. The development bonuses that are requested under the proposed PD with the multifamily 2A base provide 5% at 51 to 60% AMFI and 5% at 61 to 80% of AMFI. No change to setbacks from the underlying code, but specifying that urban form is not required. That's just generally in the PD. Requesting a height bonus to 66 feet instead of the code allowed 36 feet. And again, pointing out that the base code would allow 85 feet under mixed income housing bonuses. No bonuses requested for lot coverage. Same bonus as allowed under 51A for minimum lot area in number of, or per unit. And parking for multifamily use, they are also requesting the same bonus allowed under 51A. Taking you around the site, we are looking west along West Commerce. The request site is on the left in the screen. And then just working our way around, this is an existing egress point. You can see the tree preservation area in the back that is to be maintained and protected. Showing sidewalk conditions, roadway conditions, looking along the front of the property along West Commerce. Okay, gotcha. Sorry, are we caught up? I'll try not to.
There's a bit of a
so
lag,
fast.
slightly,
Sorry about
yeah.
that. Okay. Again, looking down West Commerce from the other direction, looking east, you get really a better picture of the roadway conditions here. West Commerce Street is not currently developed to its required standard, and we're not exactly sure at this point when that will happen. Looking along Neal Street. We're at the corner of Neal and West Commerce. In the back of the photo here, you start to see the single-family residential area, heavily treed. You're not going to see many of the houses as we move along, but working our way along the side of the property back towards Seal Street, start to see the pretty dramatic topography of the site, which the applicant is proposing to maintain and work with in their development to basically keep the larger multifamily development on Tract 1 at the lower level of West Commerce Street, and then when we basically rise to the top of the hill, the smaller part of the multifamily development on Tract 2 that's going to be facing the single family across Seal Street will be at that street level. It'll appear as a one-story development from that vantage point, but there will actually be, I guess, a basement story that's working with the topography of the site. It'll be back behind, and it won't be visible from the single-family development. Okay, we're looking along Seal Street. Single-family neighborhood is to the right in this photograph. The subject property is to the left. And then we're all the way, well, we're almost all the way to the other end of the request site. You can see the topography rises again at that point. So there is single family. I'm standing in front of a single family home looking back down Seal Street with the request property on the right and single family neighborhood to the left. Looking at the surrounding uses, adjacent to the east on West Commerce, there's an existing industrial inside use. One property over from that, we have a vehicle display sales and service. Across West Commerce, there's an existing warehouse. The pictures really don't, what they don't capture for you is kind of the activity that's happening on these properties. When I was there for a site visit, and actually Mr. Pepe went with me when we went back for a second visit, there's a lot of activity, a lot of truck traffic and moving these industrial coils, and there's lots of dust flying around. It's pretty heavy activity, and so staff is interested very much in buffering the new residential units from that activity for as long as it remains, which is unclear. Again, just looking at the warehouse across West Commerce, working our way down West Commerce Street. Also across West Commerce Street, closer to Neal Street, there's another industrial inside. I believe it's an ironworks. Across Neal Street to the west, there's an outside storage for dumpsters or trash receptacles of a large variety. And then undeveloped property at the opposite corner of Neal and Seal Street. It's, like I said, it's currently undeveloped. It looks to be platted already into the size of what could be residential lots, but it's actually still zoned industrial. And then this is a single family property at the end of Seal Street that is immediately adjacent to the tree preservation area of Tract 3. Proposed development plan. We asked them to keep the topography on to kind of give an idea of how dramatic it is, basically. You can see on the development plan that in Tract 2, essentially what's being proposed is some townhome style multifamily units. It's a small tract. It is, the uses allowed there are based on the CH district, which is kind of a bridge between a single-family district and a multifamily district. And it will be limited in the number of units that can even be placed there. Also, as I said, it's limited very much in height to no more than 26 feet in height above the level of the grade at their property line. The Tract 3 tree preservation area, it's approximately 2 acres. I think after some right-of-way dedications occur, it might dip a little bit below that, but approximately 2 acres. And then the larger multifamily mixed-use development here on Tract 1. My understanding from the applicant is that they are proposing this smaller building to be some type of retail use. I don't know, restaurant, personal service, I'm not really sure what that's going to be, but that is intended to be non-residential. And then the majority of this larger building will obviously be multifamily units. Staff is recommending that at least 60% of the length of that frontage at the ground floor be non-residential uses. So there are a few remaining boxes in the PD conditions. I do apologize for the late email that you got with, it's a cleaned up version of the PD conditions that you see in the docket. We didn't add anything new. All we did was remove the boxes where the applicant had agreed to the staff recommendation. So what I'm going to take you through here is just the remaining boxes where there are points of disagreement between applicant and staff. So under the mixed-use residential project, staff is recommending that at least 60% of the total frontage along Tract 1 contain street-level, street-facing, active non-residential uses with a minimum depth of 25 feet and continuing, and the applicant is requesting 30%. My understanding of that request, from what I can gather, this is really, I think that the number there, the 30%, because we're taking it, basically measure the property line, not just the building, measure the whole property line and multiply it by whatever percent we go with, and that is the length of the building that will have to have that active non-residential use. So if your property line is just under 1,000 feet, like say it's 1,000 feet, staff is asking for 600 feet of that to be non-residential active uses, and the applicant is requesting for that to be 30%. And essentially, if we go with the applicant's request, it will essentially be that smaller separate building, and then basically probably the leasing office and maybe the workout facility. So I don't think that with a 30% we're going to really get anything beyond that one building and then other uses that are not the residential portion of the multifamily. So staff is actually wanting to increase the percentage so we get some actual non-residential uses, like perhaps an office use or a personal service type use or restaurant, something in there that can serve the neighborhood and can be within walking distance for the residents. So that's essentially the difference in the percentage. Further down, for purposes of this definition, the applicant is requesting that the entire property shown on the development plan is considered a single building site. Staff is recommending to strike that provision. That is mainly because of a request that we repeatedly get from building inspection, that it is not always an easy thing to do to use an entire property that might be platted separately as a single site for anything, because it gets more difficult to the review process, because then someone coming in to build something on, say, lot A, has to provide information for the entire area rather than just for their lot A. The other issue with this is the use of the word single building site. This really isn't a building site yet, and building site has a specific meaning in the development code. So if we do use the applicant's request, we might look at changing that language a bit. Let's see. The applicant is also requesting a provision that at least 70 of the dwelling units are 2 or more bedrooms and 24 units have 3 or more bedrooms. Based on previous guidance from City Attorney's Office, staff is recommending to strike that provision. And then the last set of boxes, staff is recommending to strike the statement requiring the 6-foot fence within the side yard setback at track 2, because there really isn't a provision anywhere else in the conditions that actually require that fence. The applicant's representative and I spoke just prior to the briefing. The intent, I understand now, on the applicant's part is that they want to be able to allow a fence in that side yard of track 2 that is not needing to be 50% open. So I don't see an issue with that. Staff is amenable to that. The issue that we had with that was requiring it to be there, but if it's at the option and the tenants there would like to have a screening fence, staff would support that, given especially that we still have that non-residential outside storage of dumpsters across the street. Development standards, this is a repeat of what is already in the case report. I'll have it up here just in case there are questions that we need to refer back to this. And then I also had some discussions with the applicant regarding how residential proximity slope would apply to their property. So there is a residential proximity slope exhibit in the proposed PD, and what I'm showing you here is a little bit more information showing you the residential proximity slope as it would be applied under the Development Code 51A versus how it would be applied under this PD. Essentially, what we're wanting to assure, because of that dramatic grade drop that occurs at the property, what you're seeing in red here is the standard way that residential proximity slope would be measured for this site. So for example, over here, wherever this multifamily mixed-use building is going to be at that much lower grade, typically the grade of the restricted building is what is considered and is used as the spring point for that 1/3 slope. So because we have a massive drop in grade here, they're actually somewhat penalized for keeping that lower grade, and you can see that they have about 12 feet less in height that they could build to under the standard RPS definition versus the alternate if instead of using the grade of the restricted building, we use the grade at the property line of the single family. And again, this is here in case anyone has questions about that provision, we can refer back to it. Showing you the West Commerce Street section. I believe also that the other 2 street sections for Seal Street and Neal Street were forwarded, were distributed to the commissioners this morning. Staff has not had an opportunity to review those new drawings, but again, spoke to the applicant prior to the briefing, and essentially there's just a little bit of cleanup that needs to be done, but they're going to look very similar to this, or they should look very similar to this, where you're going to see the existing paving of the roadway built out, the gap between the existing roadway and the curb gutter that would start at their responsibility to build as part of this development. So this area right in here is the unbuilt portion of the roadway. Based on the PD conditions, before a certificate of occupancy could be issued for the property, the applicant would be required to build the curb and gutter inward, sorry. And at Commerce Street, we're looking at an 8-foot buffer with trees planted, an 8-foot wide sidewalk, and then a little bit remaining between building and sidewalk just to allow enough to open a door without hitting someone on the sidewalk. That's essentially where we are. Regarding landscaping, this is a bit of an update from the case report. The case report indicated that staff had requested some additional discovery regarding location of overhead electrical lines and underground utilities. We hadn't received that by the time the docket was posted, but since that time, we did get some information regarding at least 2 of the street frontages, and we have confirmed that there are utility conflicts. So at least 2 street frontages, there are confirmed utility conflicts that would prevent the development from complying with its own landscaping provisions. However, the applicant has previously verbalized, and I did reconfirm with their representative prior to the briefing, they previously verbalized that they would relocate utilities if conflicts were discovered. Obviously, staff cannot require them to do so. So that is the reason for the provision that's built into the landscaping portion of the code, that if any utility conflicts or other conflicts are discovered at permitting that would prevent them from being able to landscape or comply with the landscaping provisions of the PD, they would be required to come back for a PD amendment to the language, and then also required to have a landscape plan before they could get a CO for the location. Because essentially what will happen is, if we don't have that provision in the code, it is conceivable that an applicant could go to permitting, utility, or other conflicts could be discovered, and landscaping would not need to be provided at all, or would be, or would maybe need to be provided in a less substantial way that would not adequately buffer this property. And we do have Phil Irwin here to field any questions on that. So options moving forward, staff's preference and the applicant's preference would be that we move forward with the understanding that a full PD amendment is required if the utility conflicts are not resolved. The other option is to hold the case now to require the revised PD language and the landscape plan prior to moving to City Council. But as I said, staff and applicant are both recommending option A, and the applicant has again verbalized that they will be removing those utility conflicts. So staff recommendation is approval subject to a revised tract map, revised development plan, revised residential proximity slope illustration, revised street sections for all 3 streets abutting the property, and staff's recommended conditions as briefed. And just to elaborate briefly, the revisions to the tract map development plan, all of the exhibits essentially, these are cleanup revisions where basically the applicant and staff just need to sit down and make sure that things are consistent across. There's not going to be substantial changes to them. And I can get more detail on that. I'm having a brain block right now, so I don't remember all the details of it, but I can provide more details on that if I need to. So with that,
we're ready for questions. Commissioner Young, please.
I have questions on 2 topics. And I bet right now my colleagues are saying, I'll bet the first one is residential proximity
That's what
slope.
I was thinking.
And guess what? They're right.
Hey.
Do I understand that the reason for staff's recommendation of the alternate proximity slope is based on the lower elevation of the property as compared to the single family?
That's correct.
And does it have anything to do with the proposal to include mixed income housing?
It would need to, because if essentially height would be capped at 36 feet, and they even with standard RPS, they would be able to build up to the maximum height of 36 feet regardless. The issue is if they want to build under the bonus, they won't be able to build, they may not be able to build as much under the bonus as they're requesting without the alternate RPS.
Well, I understand that it may only matter if they do mixed income housing. But if, for example, the site were at the same elevation as the single family, would you be recommending an alternative proximity slope?
we didn't really analyze that situation because my understanding from the applicant is that they're going to work with the existing topography.
All right. So next question then is the alternative slope measured from the grade of the single-family building, or is it measured from the elevation of the single-family lot at the lot line?
From the nearest, I don't have the exact language from the docket, but it's from the intersection here of the nearest property line and the grade at that point.
Well, that's why I asked my question, because grade is a defined term in the code that references buildings, not land topography.
So perhaps we could clarify that by saying the elevation of, the grade elevation of.
Well, I'll trust
or the level
attorneys.
of the grade, right? I think it could be cleaned up and made clear.
But the intent is that it is the elevation of the lot at the property line.
That's correct.
Okay, got that on the record so the attorneys can do their thing.
Yes.
All right, turning to the other topic, which is the intersection of landscaping and utilities. Am I correct that as written now, if going forward the applicant will have several options? Number one will be to relocate the utilities so there is no longer any conflict and comply fully with Article 10.
Well, comply fully with Article 10 and the enhanced landscape requirements that are in the PD.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
And the second alternative will be to seek a full zoning change.
Yes, they would have to come back to amend the PD and provide a landscape plan that would be satisfactory to the body.
And if they did that, the 2-year waiver rule would be in effect, would it not?
Probably so.
All right, and that would require, under current code, a changed circumstance regarding the property. And under the forthcoming code, who knows what will end up passing.
True.
But in any event, the applicant would be asking us to waive the 2-year period based on circumstances that were fully foreseeable at the time of today's hearing.
So I think this is really an excellent line of questioning on your part, because obviously, I mean, I think it's evident, and now it's on the record, that the applicant is aware that there are utility conflicts, right? So it's not a change in circumstances. So, I mean, they would have to make that case, but.
This is all a predicate to some questions for the applicant this afternoon.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
I really am a little bit disappointed that we only spent just a few minutes on RPS.
We can come back to that.
If you would like to talk about it for another half hour.
But we could do a sidebar, because, you know, I like to kind of nerd out on the code.
I'm sure the rest of the commission would love to hear it too.
Everyone loves RPS as much as you, everybody, yeah. Thank you.
Something I thought I'd never hear on Plan Commission. More RPS talk.
Yes.
Commissioner Stanhope, please.
Yes, a couple of questions I have. I mean, this has gotten, I might be asking you things you've already explained, but there have been so many different iterations, and now we have one this morning that I haven't seen. So I'm going to go over a couple of things I'd like to ask. One has to do with the box, the open box, about the 30% and 60%, okay? Although I heard your explanation that you used a formula under the MURP to say, or whatever, this much of the street, and I get that formula. The other side of this, though, is if I am the person building there, why shouldn't I have flexibility? And at 30%, wouldn't I be allowed to go up to 60% if I chose to? I mean, let's say I only wanted to put, okay, let's say if it was 30% and I'm going to just put a fitness center and a leasing office, okay? Now, but if I decided and I wanted to add a restaurant, couldn't I go up to 60%? So I'm not for, my concern is when we start telling an applicant, you must put this much non-residential uses in an area, that gets a little uncomfortable to me. What are your thoughts on that?
So I apologize, I have to answer your question while not seeing you. So I hope we rethink this layout for next time. This is really weird for me.
We're actually
I feel so much taller than I actually am, so that when things like this happen, it just really kind of throws me. So
We'll be fine. We're actually going back into the briefing room next time, so.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So yes, the applicant obviously would be able to do more than 60% or more than 30%, but that's the nature of a point of disagreement between staff and the applicant, is that staff is recommending these ground floor non-residential uses for certain reasons. One of those reasons being it's an additional buffer against the existing industrial use across the way. Another reason being it provides some neighborhood services potentially for an area that doesn't really have access to anything within walking distance. Another reason being it is, while we don't make land use decisions solely based on any area plan or anything, it is worth noting that the nature of an urban, I can't remember the name of it, the building block calls for things like ground floor retail and certain non-residential or commercial uses along key corridors. So we're on a key corridor. We're not having any non-residential uses, that aren't already allowed in an MF2A or a CH. We're not allowing really heavy uses. We're simply saying we need to provide some services for the neighborhood within walking distance, and we need to buffer the new residential units a bit against what is existing currently. So this is what you're getting at is the crux of the disagreement between staff and applicant. Staff is recommending more for these reasons. The applicant they initially requested, I think it was 40 or 50%. It was more, and then when they understood the definition of street frontage, we talked about it more. I get the idea that they really are not wanting to provide any of these things at this particular development. In staff's assessment, these are necessary services for the neighborhood and for the new development that would come in.
Okay, I have two other questions on this.
Yes, ma'am.
And you just sort of brought up one of them. This is just a quick one, and maybe I didn't understand it. But if you're going to have non-residential services at this spot, how can you also have no surface parking in the area adjacent to streets? How would people get to the leasing office? How would they get to the services?
So part of the reason for the putting the services here is so that they're within walking distance of the neighborhood. The idea is providing a variety of uses in an area that are not just a home, but if I want to walk to the corner store to, get a fizzy drink or something, I can do that. So walking would be the primary way. But there is parking on site that is surface parking. The recommendation regarding parking is that it not be between the building and the property line, that it be back behind or adjacent to the buildings.
I saw on it that the wording, I understood that it said, and I may be totally incorrect, but when I read it, it was more about between the building and the facade of a building and the street. Okay. Well, that seems sort of counterintuitive to me if someone's driving up to lease a place here and goes to the leasing office or goes to a restaurant outside of this area, that everyone is not going to be walking. So, and you would have, if you had those non-residential services they're facing a main street to be accessible to people, other people too. So I didn't quite get that. So it's a question, but I don't know how it can be resolved.
So it's not that there's not surface parking being provided. I mean, if you look at the development plan, there is surface parking being provided between the smaller building on Plan East. So there's surface parking there. I don't know where else it's going to be. I don't know what their operations are going to be in terms of providing, parking within the parking garage. I mean, I don't know, but there are a variety of ways that you can provide parking other than having them be in front of a building between the street and the building.
Well, I'm not sure, and you can think about this, that doesn't need to be clarified because it very specifically says no surface parking between any facades. And my feeling was you really meant that to be about the houses, not so much about the non-residential uses. So there should be a caveat, except maybe for non-residential uses. Just a suggestion. I have one other question.
If I may interfere here for a second. Putting parking behind the building and hiding the parking behind the building being a garage or a surface parking lot, I think is the best thing we can do for the environment, for the safety of pedestrians, for urban form, for everything else. So I would say that no, we would prefer to have parking behind the building for all the reasons that I said.
Okay, my last question is this, and this I think is still one of the boxes. I'm not sure if it's been cleared up or not. And maybe you explain this. Why did you make one of the, in our normal, quote, urban form that we've been using, and I understand you're dealing with this trucks and this industrial across the street, but our normal urban form has been the 5-foot buffer, the 5-foot or 6-foot sidewalk, and then a sort of internal green space. Why have you requested an 8-foot buffer of green space?
This has to do with the fact that the PD is specifying that trees are to be planted within that buffer that's between the curb and the sidewalk. So honestly, a 5-foot buffer is really not adequate for planting these types of trees. Dr. Irwin?
Oh, well, we plant trees and 5-foot buffers everywhere else in the city.
Okay, so the arborists that I have consulted with have indicated to me that 5 feet is really pushing the limit on the small side for the safety and health of the trees. He requested that we try to get more for the safety and health of the trees, 8 feet being optimal. So we're essentially saying, just move the sidewalk towards the private property a little bit more to provide an 8-foot wide space where we can safely and comfortably plant trees and allow them to grow in a healthy manner. So this is based on arborist consultation, and I'm sure he can go into that a little bit more if needed.
I would also like to add that in the latest PDs, as much as we can, we try to enhance that buffer to 8 foot. One is for the trees to be healthier, and the same, it's safer for pedestrians, especially on bigger thoroughfares, because 5 foot is not necessarily as safe. It's better to have a bigger distance. So as much as we can, we try to do 8 foot, but we do understand that there's sometimes our constraint, and we have a minimum 5-foot buffer.
So, and to add on to that, staff is not requesting an 8-foot buffer at Seal Street because the intention at Seal Street is not to have the trees planted within that parkway. At Seal Street, the trees will actually be planted on the private property side of the sidewalk within that 15-foot enhanced landscape buffer. So we don't need the additional space for tree planting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Wheeler?
My concern is so looking at, let me go back. So looking at the background information and saying, and this is the request property part of existing industrial corridor, and that it also sits outside of It's outside the boundaries of the area, including in the Trinity River corridor and the West Dallas urban structure guidelines. And by that, sitting outside of that area, and this being an industrial area, and most of those businesses in that industrial area are long-term industrial. And so we're bringing in a multifamily residential property right in the middle of an industrial area that is going to definitely have some type of environmental issues while we approving it. And the reason being is sitting here and going through every street, going across Sullivan and going across Singleton. And I'm seeing that there is, and the houses sit so far back into the community. How would even having any other than residential use, how would that even help the rest of the community when it's not really in walking distance anyway? But to even approve that is causing us to impede in areas that have been set aside for certain uses that we need, that provides jobs. And if this developer builds there, then and then all of a sudden we have an issue with those businesses that's been there for a long term and pretty much itching them out of an area that was already zoned for them.
It's a great question. Typically, you're correct. If we had an area that was intended to be, heavy industrial uses, we're not going to plop down houses in the middle of that. I mean, they're not uses that we typically want to see together. So a bit of the history, though, of this area is that this actually was a residential area prior, and these industrial uses sort of invaded or inserted themselves into this area. And gradually, however, the zoning within that area has been changing away from the industrial. So I have the zoning map up on the screen right now. For example, these areas, these PDs that are across, and right here, this double line right here is where the railway goes through. Right on the other side of that, we have a couple of PDs that have come in. We've got some single family that is there. So these areas have already been rezoned previously to allow either multifamily uses or mixed uses with a residential component. The intent of these PDs that came in was to be able to provide that additional housing. Additionally, if you see to the right side of the screen here, PD 935, also a relatively recent PD, more residential has come in that area. So the area has already been gradually changing towards a less commercial, less industrial area. There's some batch plants down the road that have existed for a while that recently reapplied and were denied the renewal of their SUP because this area is definitely changing in this direction that we're going. And again, thinking in terms of the original history of it, this was a residential area that's basically being reclaimed for residential. This is not an ideal place for these uses, these industrial uses, and they're gradually going away.
So those businesses that have been there for probably 20 plus years eventually will be etched out. And my biggest concern is the whole street. That whole area, that whole particular area, the residential uses are a little farther back, even though we've done back and forth where residential come in and then commercial come in, but my biggest concern is that those businesses will be great, especially from the environmental aspect of it. You said that when you were there, we can really see based off of the pictures of the heavy use of trucks, and we have other areas that have environmental issues because of this. So my just concern was and it's outside of what the West Dallas urban structure guidelines. It sits outside of those boundaries. Mm-hmm. So we're now impeding the boundaries into that area.
Well, it's really it's like its property line is where those studies begin. It's really just on the periphery of those things. And I would wholeheartedly agree with you if we were proposing the other direction. If an industrial use tried to come into a residential area, staff would not recommend approval of that. But we are seeing the trend of development in the area. And we are also, like I said, it's not part of those particular area studies, but the vision map does envision this area for a more primarily residential area with some mixed uses. So your point is well made, and I hear your point and typically would agree with the point, except for the development trends in the area and the history of the site. Just the way that things are moving in this particular area, everything is tending away from these industrial uses. They're not being forced to leave. They can remain. And that was part of the discussion we had with the applicant, is we have no guarantee that any of these industrial uses are going to go away. So we welcome, the variety of residential types here. So there's more options for people to live in this area than just to own a single family home. But if those uses were to stay forever, we need to do something to continue to protect the residential that is there from those uses. That's part of why this became a PD, so that we could ensure things like that the tree preservation area couldn't be bulldozed. Like we need to keep things that will contribute to the health of the residents in the area, because we see what's out there now, and there's no guarantee it will go away. So they're not being inched out.
So my concern, I guess my concern is that I understand that we need more housing, and actually where those are being built at along West Commerce on the opposite side, up and down Sullivan. I understand that, and just my concern is to, even though that we're adding more housing to the city of Dallas, that even though that when you look at it from the outside, you're saying, hey, these environment, these IM districts and these IR districts, but they are also businesses that contribute to the needs of Dallas, right, in any other aspects. And they just want to make sure that they are also protected just as much as the residential are protected, and especially when there's a district. So you're looking up and down, when I'm going through different streets and going through and seeing, but how many of those? So I get what you're saying, but it's just that it just seems to allow a multi-use apartment complex in an area that's highly trafficked with trucks. It just seems that the approval that area, and maybe I'm wrong. Right.
No, I do understand your point, and like I said, in many circumstances, would agree with what you're saying. Were it not for the trends in the area, the history of the site, and you're concerned about protecting the industrial uses. Again, none of them are being forced to leave. They can remain. But several of the properties that were industrial have been sold and have been rezoned and redeveloped with these types of developments in the area. But you're very good point. I appreciate the concern, actually.
Thank you. Commissioner Houseright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to go back to the non-residential active uses conversation with a question. I'm going to reserve my comments on the specifics of this topic until the hearing, but the question being, did you or did the applicant discuss walk-up units, stoops, as an acceptable element in the street activation? Now, Grant, I understand that's residential, and you've said non-residential in your language so far, but bear with me. Yes. Expanding the definition of these active uses to include stoops, walk-ups, et cetera, has that been discussed?
Just move so I can.
Yeah.
Yes, that was definitely discussed. And again, that you're hitting on the crux of the point of disagreement. So if the commission were to decide to go with the applicant's request of 30%, there still is language in the ordinance that would require a certain percentage of the residential units that were street facing to connect to the sidewalk. And so that element is still in there. Staff is just recommending more of the non-residential than the applicant would request. Yes, it was a discussion.
I see. Okay, and then a second unrelated question. I think Commissioner Wheeler's questions a moment ago were excellent. Is anything we're doing here, does it have any unintended consequences on the operations of the adjacent industrial uses?
Such as?
Such as hours of operation, noise, traffic, et cetera. Anything that would, again, something that I might not think about.
So the industrial uses that are there or based on, or could go there based on, this is really awkward, that could go there based on the IM or IR zoning, there wouldn't be limitations to any of those uses in terms of hours of operations or anything like that. The only thing I could really think of would be possibly screening requirements, but it's across a street, so that wouldn't really come into play. You're inching some residential closer, so conceivably you're moving a site of origination for an RPS closer to, but the difference here is that with the multifamily site of origination, that it's a 1-to-1 slope, first of all, so it's a steeper slope, and it only extends for 50 feet. After 50 feet, it's no longer in play. So you have a 60-foot right-of-way. They're not even going to reach the properties across. Conceivably, they could reach the ones across Neal Street, but again, I think the 50-foot hard stop of that residential proximity slope when it's originating in a multifamily base doesn't really create issues for the surrounding uses. And then I can't think of any other limitations that would really be on those sites. Yep. Do you know something I don't know? Okay. Okay.
Commissioner Treadway.
Thank you, Chair. A couple questions. Is there anything that's protecting these trees in place right now?
No.
Okay, so this PD will have the benefit of creating basically a conservation zone for all of these trees.
It's not technically a conservation, but yes, in essence, no development is permitted.
Great. Okay, so this whole 30/60, have you done the calculation to see, based on current plans, what is the percentage?
Okay, so the percentage, so this was part of the discussion with the applicant, is that 60% or 30% of the frontage, the street frontage, that is a defined term in our development code. It's not based on the size of any building. It's based on the property line.
Yep.
So if you have a 1,000-foot property line and you need 60% of that frontage to be an active non-residential use, then you're taking 60% of the length of the property line, which 600 feet. That means your building is, first of all, your building is going to have to be, you're going to have at least 600 feet in width of building because you would have to provide 600 feet of non-residential uses. But so it really isn't dependent on the size of any building. Tell me if I'm misunderstanding.
Okay, so what I heard you say originally, and I may be wrong, so you've got 1,000 feet because you're measuring it from property line. So you already know they've got the separate building, they've got the facility, the fitness, and they've got the leasing office. So those three things, what percentage are they of that property line currently?
We don't have actual floor plans of anything, so.
But they could be 40%. Like, we could already be over 30%. I just didn't know if y'all had done the math on that.
Right, so that is my, I'm anticipating that those types of things would cover their 30% and they would not have to provide anything other than that if we went with their requested 30%. So we're requesting more than that so that they do need to provide some other non-residential uses.
But there's no, I guess, the math, the numbers haven't been crunched to determine what the current percentage is.
Correct.
Okay.
That would be a great question for the applicant, though.
Yeah. And then personal use, I'm going to go back to this because it's my understanding, looking at the PD terms, that all personal services are permitted.
So thank you for bringing that up, because I got an email from the applicant recently. We've been continuing discussions just to try to iron out as much of this as we can. There are some personal service uses that he is going to, I guess, add as being not allowed, such as, I don't remember, tattoo parlors and massage and things like that. So bail bonds, I think, was the other one. So there are some personal service uses that I believe the applicant is going to say we need to restrict these to.
Okay, that's great. So we'll hear more about that from the applicant.
Yes.
My last question goes to page 12-4, which is traffic.
Yes.
It says, the study shows that the current condition of the roadways is not able to support the increase in density without causing significant traffic delays. But there doesn't seem, at least I may have missed it, where would the plan be to improve the roadways to?
You didn't miss it.
Okay.
You didn't miss it. So let me just kind of go into that, and if we need Mr. Navarez to elaborate, we can. But I'm going to intentionally try to get the ire of Dr. Udrea up right now by saying chicken and egg right now. So this is a chicken and egg scenario where the roadways can't really handle the extra development without causing some delays. But if we don't get the development in the area, there's nothing that's going to, there's nothing that's going to sort of spark the city putting resources towards improvement of the infrastructure if there's not development that needs to have improved roadways. So right now, with the single family, I mean, there's minor streets in the middle of their neighborhood that are used. West Commerce is a mess right now with the truck traffic and all that stuff. It's only maybe, I'm estimating 22, 24 feet wide right now. It's way underbuilt. So that's part of the question is, platting is not going to trigger this requirement for the applicant to build, because in order for them to have to improve those roadways, their frontage would need to be at least 1,000 feet. And if you notice, it's slightly less than that. So there's nothing right now that's going to trigger those improvements. So that's part of why in the PD conditions we're saying before you get a certificate of occupancy, you must build curb and gutter, sidewalk. That's why that language is in there, because if we don't put it in there, they won't be required to build. Now, I'm going to guess that an applicant that wants to lease units is going to want to dress up the area and make it usable. So I can't speak for them, but they probably can address it better. But staff is working under the idea that when development comes into the area, the more development that comes in, this will at some point trigger the city, if it's not done before then, to put resources towards improvements.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Hampton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to repeat some of the questions. I have some of the same concerns on the calculation on the frontages and how the residential component plays into that. One overarching question are your street sections. Staff is recommending that each street section have its own component, and that's just meant to capture where street trees goes, what the defined buffers are, all of those various elements that are in the language, but bring some clarity to what the intent is. Is that correct?
Yes, but also, yes, that, and to clarify exactly where setbacks need to be measured from, because there was some discussion between myself and Mr. Navarez. So essentially, setbacks are taken from the right-of-way line, which typically in this instance, we have a 60-foot right-of-way, so 30 feet from the center line, you're going to measure from there. However, with the incorporation of the additional buffer and the addition with the sidewalk, if that sidewalk is a required sidewalk they're going to have to provide an easement for that. There was some question going back and forth as to whether the setbacks at permitting would actually be taken from the inside face of that required public sidewalk because it's required for pedestrian traffic. So to avoid any confusion, Mr. Navarro has actually recommended that we have the street sections and then specify exactly where those 15-foot setbacks were going to be taken from. So in the setback language, it's, I hope that I put it in there, measured from the right-of-way line as shown in exhibit street sections. So it's for everything that you said plus having a reference point to say, we don't want you to measure the 15-foot setback from the inside of the sidewalk easement. We want you to measure it from that right-of-way line back.
Okay, and so that could be whether it's individual sections or it's one exhibit that captures the 3 different streets, and that could serve the same purpose. Is that correct?
Yes, so I guess the reasoning for, also because there's so much right-of-way dedication that's going to be happening in these areas, and the built-up roadway, it's really underbuilt in all locations. So we're capturing what's built right now, what's the gap that still needs to be built, how big the buffer is, where the trees are going to be planted. So on 2 of the frontages, they're in the parkway. One of the front is not. So just clarifying all that.
Okay, and then separate question. Under uses, there's the definition for the mixed-use residential project. I don't see any definition of percentages. I don't see anything that you're required to have a minimum of 1 use. Did I overlook that?
No, you didn't overlook it. So rather than saying how many non-residential uses, that's the nature of the 60% versus 30%. So we're capturing 60% of the frontage.
Okay.
Staff is recommending 60, so that's the calculation rather than saying you're required to have X number of uses.
So if this body didn't follow staff's recommendation on that as the alternate, it would likely need to be captured within the uses to ensure that there was a minimum standard established. Is that correct?
Correct. So I would recommend, if that is the direction that the body wants to go, that we then look at how we've defined non-residential active uses. So if we're going to require a certain number of them, we might look at removing the allowance for the accessory uses to the multifamily so that we really capture an actual non-residential use like a retail or a restaurant, whatever.
Understood.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to move to the next item, trying to be fast because
Yes,
I know
ma'am.
others may have questions too.
Yes.
Mixed income housing. I noticed that this is included at 5%, and based on the percentages and density and height that are requested, that doesn't appear to be consistent with our base code or some of the type 3 standards that we have established. Has there been any conversation about, I think 5 and 5 or 10 appeared to be more consistent with our other projects?
So the first staff report that was going to be for Icepocalypse had just the 5%. This staff report, and I didn't correct it in one location. I tried to catch all the locations. It's mentioned 3 or 4 times in the staff report, and I missed one of the locations. But in the majority of those locations, it is specifying 5% at 51 to 60, 5% at 61 to 80. And actually, for this MVA category, they would actually only be required to give 5% at 81 to 100.
Okay. Thank you. I was toggling between 3 versions, so
Yeah,
thanks
it
for the
gets confusing.
clarification. I think 2 more quick items. On the surface parking, MF2 is our base in this district. I think base MF2 zoning allows parking in the front yard setback. I think as staff has it defined, you're only prohibiting it on primary streets, but that would only pick up Commerce and Seal.
So that again was another change from the first docket to this one. So staff's recommendation was that it apply at all streets.
Okay,
And,
I'll
and
double
they've
check
agreed,
that.
they've agreed to that.
All right, perfect. And last item, transparency. How did staff review that? Well, let me start by saying it appears generally consistent with what the form-based code has. However, Shop Street or shop-facing standards, I'm not getting quite the combination of words, but it's a higher percentage because it is intended to be an active use versus a residential use. So was there any discussion of looking at that more holistically?
There was, and quite frankly, that didn't get fleshed out as much as it probably should have. So if this body were to decide maybe that we wanted more transparency at the ground floor, staff would welcome that.
Okay.
Sorry, man.
And I'm going to apologize, Chair, I have one final question. Buffers on interior streets. So buffers are covered at all of the perimeters, but there's a pretty substantive interior circulation. Was there a discussion of including a buffer at that street as well?
There was not. There was just a discussion about providing plantings and providing a pathway.
Please.
So there was not a discussion about that.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Alvier.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Chair.
Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are related to kind of the overall visioning and what may be happening in the area. I made a note to describe the urban neighborhood building block, but you went over it really thoroughly, so I appreciate that and understand what they mean by it and where they're trying to go. But my concerns are with the surrounding areas being IM and IR, and the notion that Forward Dallas would then have a vision for this area that then transforms it to residential or more walkable or whatnot. Does it seem compatible to change an area from this industrial nature to a more residential kind of nature, as opposed to seeing something that's more compatible with IM and IR, particularly IR? That could be more of a clean kind of industrial approach. And the reason behind that thinking is the residential is coming in and gentrifying an industrial area. And that industrial area can be redefined to be more beneficial to the city itself, as opposed to saying, yeah, all of these are going to go away, because we can't guarantee that they're going to go away. Correct. They're probably going to be there being neighbors to these people for a long time. So I would think that it behooves us to look at how we might suggest that they change a model into something more clean that might marry better with the residential uses that we have. So the bigger area, the bigger conversation in question is, how do you interpret where Forward Dallas was going with the area visioning for this area related to this particular proposal to put in this residential and the mix of uses?
So the way that staff interprets it is that this urban building block is reclaiming an area that was residential that got invaded by industrial. This was a corridor that it was a residential area, and these uses came in and sat themselves next to neighborhoods. We've never approved that at this point. Staff would not recommend that. Both of your points are well made, and staff is in agreement that these are not compatible uses to be next to each other. But the fact is that they exist next to each other. So staff is seeing this development proposed as a PD, adding protections. For example, Commissioner Treadway brought up earlier, right now, someone could come in and bulldoze the entire 2-acre area of trees that are serving, trees are health, right? So right now, if we do not have a development come in where we can afford some of the protections, those existing industrial uses could come in and sit themselves right next to that single-family home at the top of the hill that I showed you. So while the point is well made and staff is in agreement that they're not compatible, it's more returning an area to its original nature. And while the area is in transition, putting as many buffers and protections in as we can, so that, it's not ideal to have residential next to these uses.
But does it make sense to create another lane that helps to straddle the fence, so to speak, between residential and IM, IR particularly? Because it's going to be difficult to come in and change the direction of an aircraft carrier, which is what's happening there right now. And we understand where residential and it's needed, and is a component that comes in to make this area come together. But I'm just wondering, is this an opportunity to create another lane in the code that allows for a more advanced kind of IR residential relationship to happen where we don't have that anywhere else?
Perhaps, but that's kind of a larger scale topic than what we're what we're addressing today. So what we have in front of us is a proposal for this particular lot, and that's what we're assessing. Given the circumstances holistically in staff's assessment, this is a good addition to the area. Again, your point is well made. It's just not really within the scope of what we're doing here.
Understood. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Weaver.
I'm going to make it quick. I understand families from West Dallas area, and 60, 70 years ago, this impeded their area. But I'm going to make note of it again that we're seeing this throughout Dallas, right? Multifamily properties are moving in. They're moving in fast. The whole Sullivan corridor that's on the, not right in the center of this particular IRIM. Across West Commerce on the other side, we're seeing multifamilies grow in because of the changes. But we have to start
Mr.
making...
Chair, I would just like to remind Commissioner Wheeler, you got to ask a question at this point.
So my question is this: when do we also take into account for the businesses that are not, we know what happened in the past, but we still have to take into account that these are businesses and that this type of property, if you said that it would be easier if it was the opposite way.
Would be easier, I mean, it would be a very...
It would be easier for you to object.
Definitely a deny.
We don't consider businesses either?
But these businesses are not impacted really by this use coming in.
They will be, if they will be, because this is a multifamily, and we have to protect residents environmentally, all the things that's going to come along with it. We will eventually be a conversation about totally rezoning it because of the environmental issue from the heavy truck traffic, everything. So it will be. So it's saying that we do know our residential should come first, but we also have to take in consideration on what's there. They were zoned there, whoever did it, but now just this particular property, not the ones around. I can get how that changed, but just going from up and down the street, across the street, that area, and it's outside of the scope. It's outside of what that urban building block is. It's, have it notated that it's outside of that urban building block.
Let me clarify. It's not outside the urban building block. It's within that area that is envisioned in Forward Dallas Comprehensive Plan as an urban building block. It's outside of the other specific area plans that were named, but it is solidly within an area that is envisioned as an urban building block. I mean, this area just wasn't considered as part of those other area plans that I mentioned, but the entire city was captured within the Forward Dallas vision illustration, and this area is solidly within the urban building block. I apologize if that wasn't made clear before.
It's fine. It's just that looking at the area, and it's easier to do one way than the other. It just seems as if like we're setting up something that's going to be an issue in eventually to those business owners, and we kind of know that if we approve this.
Thank you. Any other last questions, commissioners? Okay, we will conclude our briefing. It is 12:27. Thank you, Ms. Aguirre. Commissioners will brief the rest of the docket before we hear it at the hearing. It is 12:27. That concludes the briefing of the Dallas City Plan Commission. Let's take our lunch break.